In a series of two very similar teams, one team did not look very similar. In fact, the Chicago Cubs looked pretty good. 2 out of 3, they clobber the Cincinnati Reds. We have with us Sam Olbur, the brand new one of two parts for the Locked On Cubs crew coming at you. This is his debut on the Locked On Network. He's going to start next week with his pal Matt Kazi, but I wanted to bring him in to wrap up this series. Hey, what's up? This is Jeff Carr. This is a Locked On Reds, Locked On Cubs crossover, post-series crossover. We will look back at this series that had a lot going on. Not going to lie, the first game of the series gave me a lot more hope than the second and third games did. But we'll talk about some surprises as well, including the Reds pitching staff. Not necessarily the bullpen. That hasn't surprised me at all this year, but the starting pitching did. And then, of course, we'll look ahead to the tumultuous, let's say, I think that's a nice way of putting it, path forward for both of our teams. But I want to start off because we're joined by Sam Olbur. This is his first foray into Locked On. So real quickly, Sam, before we jump into this series, why do you like the Cubs?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Jeff, thanks for having me on, bringing me on. This is cool for me to do my first show with you, Cubs Reds. Man, just a diehard Cub fan, really similar to you with the Reds. Born and raised. My dad brought it upon me. For good or for worse, it's my team. It's a good day when the Cubs win. It's a bad day when the Cubs lose. A lot more bad than good in my 28 years. But November 2nd, 2016 was my 23rd birthday and a World Series. So it was all worth it that day. And since then, Jeff, it's been not good.
Well, honestly, though, I envy you a little bit because the last time the Reds were in the World Series, I was in diapers, so I can't really claim to remember that. It's been a long time. But this series has shown that both teams, they're going to be fighting with the Pirates for whoever gets third place. Let's not kid ourselves. I really thought that the Cubs could sneak up, at least during spring training. I thought the Cubs could sneak up on the Brewers and the Cardinals, but nobody's sneaking up on the Brewers and the Cardinals. It's them two playing at the top and the Pirates and the Cubs and the Reds down at the bottom. But when you look back at these last 3 games, what was your biggest takeaway from what the Cubs did to the Reds?
Well, my biggest takeaway, I think you and I are in the same boat. Every game, every series, we are looking at stuff we could take away for the future, right?
Right.
And for me, it was Keegan Thompson, game 1. Although his line wasn't great, I thought he threw the ball really well. Justin Steele, another pitcher, a part of the future, hopefully throws the ball really well last night. And then tonight, your fantasy guy, my fantasy guy, Christopher Morel, breaks out of what was really a pretty long slump. He had struck out at least twice in 19 straight games, goes 5 for 5 today with a home run off ace reliever Max Schrock, position player. But still, I thought that was a big takeaway. You're just looking for things to, get to the future and be happy about or be excited about. So from the Cubs perspective, that's what I took away. I don't know about you with the Reds, but I have some stuff I took away from the Reds too that was really shocking for me.
Yeah, the biggest takeaway I had from this is that the adjustment period for both Graham Ashcraft and Hunter Greene have begun. I mean, they're definitely in the middle of it, and they're both at different stages. I think that, honestly, Graham Ashcraft in the final game of this series really had a struggle early on with a lot of, oh, gosh darn it, that's a tough play. Like, oh, man, that just missed that guy's glove right there. Oh, it fell where they weren't, and they could have been there, but they weren't. And then Patrick Wisdom clobbered the ball, and then you're like, okay, this isn't just bad luck anymore. This is just a bad outing for Graham Ashcraft, probably the worst of his young career, which isn't saying very much. It's a small sample size, but you're talking about a dude who is coming off of a beautiful start at Oracle Park. He pitched 8 beautiful innings against the Giants and beat them. So I was like, okay, what are we going to get from him today? It was a little bit more of the, okay, need to fix a few things, but I'm still very happy with where he is in his development. On the flip side of things, Hunter Greene has me a bit concerned because Hunter Greene has oodles of talent. He has all of the intangibles that you want in an ace pitcher. He's very even-keeled. He knows how to calm himself down. He's very smart, and he learns. The one thing he's not learned, though, is how to throw that changeup. He threw one changeup in that start, and the rest of them were four-seam fastballs and sliders. And you're not going to be a good starting pitcher. You might be an okay back end of the rotation guy with 2 pitches, but even then, you're not pitching more than 5 innings in any given start. He's got to add that third pitch. So my biggest thought when it came to this series for the Redlegs was the starting pitching. Now, on the lineup side of things, there were a couple of guys that really started to come up a bit. I mean, Joey Votto had the big home run last night, had a 3-hit night. I'm wearing his jersey today. And then you had Nick Senzel. He didn't play very well in the series finale, but he had a nice stretch. And he's been hitting the ball a lot better as of late, because we had gotten to the point where we're just like, former number 2 overall pick,
Sure.
whatever, he's not playing. Like, where do we factor a guy like that into the future? We were starting to think that we might not, but he's turning a corner that I think he's going to argue the point of sticking around for a little bit longer and maybe see if he can be here, because we're kind of earmarked, and this is something we'll get into here in a few minutes, but we've kind of earmarked the year 2024 as when we can start having expectations again for this Redlegs team. But when you looked at the Reds this series, what was your first thought?
So let me offer you and all your Reds listeners a positive Cubs perspective spin on what you said, because I do disagree a little bit, but obviously I don't watch them on a regular basis. I do watch a lot of Hunter Greene because he's one of my guys on my team. But Jeff, the Cubs haven't had a legitimate pitching prospect like a Hunter Greene, like a Graham Ashcraft. I'm not as familiar with Lodolo because he hasn't really pitched much, but we haven't had a legitimate pitching prospect probably since homegrown, since Mark Pryor.
Right.
And I understand Hunter Greene needs to add a changeup, but when you have a guy who's 22, and that in pitching years, when you add in the COVID year, is really, really young. He was throwing 102 last night, 102, and I understand he needs to add a third pitch. But what Cub fans, the Cubs, we don't have one guy that throws above 97. There's no velocity on this team at all. Right. So what I would say this, there's examples around all of baseball. Corbin Burns, highly touted guy, really struggled early on. Lucas Giolito struggled a little bit this year, but he struggled early on too, had a rough year. I think Hunter Greene's going to be just fine. He has plenty of time. If you're a Reds fan, your goal is, like you said, by 2024, that's when he needs to be the ace of this staff. And there's plenty of time for that. I think with Ashcraft, honestly, I told you this before we got on, I texted you, there's a lot of guys that are going to struggle tonight. It's 90 plus at Wrigley, wind's blowing out. He has some bad luck early with that wisdom hit. He's a pitch to contact guy, which you've watched way more of him than I have. I'm surprised he's throwing like 97 mile an hour cutters. Again, if I had a Cub throwing 97 mile an hour cutters, I don't care if he's given up 8 runs a game. That's intriguing. And then my biggest surprise, Jeff, and I'll kick it back to you because I've only watched a lot of the Reds when they played the Cubs, is there's a lot of guys in this bullpen I haven't heard of. Everybody's throwing 98, 99. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong, but I'll tell you the bullpen, there's a whole nother podcast there. But
no, I know they're not good, but sorry to cut you off. But it's like Jim Deshaies, the Cubs color guy, said today, there is a lot to work with that pitching staff. Mm-hmm. And one of the things Matt and I are going to talk about on our show, and this is a little bit of a spoiler alert of why the Cubs are in the position they're in, a second rebuild in 10 years for one of the 3-4 biggest markets in all the league, is we haven't been able to draft and develop homegrown pitching whatsoever. I've never seen a young guy throw 100 miles an hour for the Cubs consistently. And I understand there's more than velocity, but Hunter Greene, I think he's going to be fine. I haven't watched enough of Ashcraft. I was not surprised that he struggled tonight. This is one of those games. But to me, my impression of the series, look, I know, bad defense and stuff for the Reds. That's going to happen when you're a last place team. But I was just really surprised at just the stuff that a lot of these Reds pitchers are bringing to the table. The numbers aren't good, but man, there's a lot of potential with that staff.
I do agree. There's definitely the kind of talent there that Derek Johnson, the pitching coach, has a lot of fun guys to work with. It's not like last year. Last year, the bullpen was made up of retreads, waiver claims, and guys that they got on minimum deals that were looking for employment anywhere. And he's not dealing with that. Now, the numbers have not shown that it's any better. In fact, numbers have actually shown it to be slightly worse. But I'm with you there. And there's part of what you're saying right now that I was actually excited about as the season started, because these are unknown guys. We're working with unknown commodities that have some sort of upside, some sort of ceiling that they could reach. I didn't think we had any sort of ceiling guys last year. We had whatever they give us is going to be a surprise, and if they give us bad pitching, it's not going to be a surprise. So that was nice to see this year that they really went all in on the young guys. And I'm excited to see where a lot of them go. And you're right. Time is what they need. And there's lots of reasons why it's frustrating why Reds fans aren't giving them time, but that'll be another podcast. I tell you what, though, you mentioned surprises. There were some surprises for me. The biggest surprise for me had to deal with the lineup from the Reds. And we're going to get into that after I tell you about making your next great bet. You're going to find it at betonline.net. And in fact, like you had mentioned, and I don't know why I didn't do this, but I should have hammered the over when you told me that the wind was blowing out. That would have been like the easiest bet ever. And that was from Sam Olbur, not betonline.net. But betonline.net has all of your props, odds, and lines for Major League Baseball. They've got great stuff for the NBA offseason that is off to a roaring start as NBA free agency opened up last night. You've got the NFL futures that you can jump into as training camp approaches. And you've got great stuff like MMA, boxing. I mean, UFC 276 is coming up on Saturday. 2 great title fights. You got Sugar Sean O'Malley fighting. It's going to be a great night of fighting. BetOnline has you covered for all of it. And speaking of baseball, for some reason, I'm not seeing the Cubs line tomorrow. I don't know why, but the Reds are huge underdogs. And they should be, because Mike Minor's pitching against Max Fried. This is going to be a tough matchup to watch, I believe. And BetOnline is the best place to take any kind of, and there's going to be prop bets and stuff you can look at as well. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thanks again for making Locked On Reds and Locked On Cubs your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. Coming up next week, we're going to be off for July 4th, but we will be back July 5th talking about the events of the Braves series and getting you set for Reds Mets. Plus you got Cubs, Red Sox, and I'm sure they're going to be all over what's going on between the Cubbies and the Red Sox. 2 formerly cursed teams, but I don't think we consider them cursed teams anymore.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. I tell you what, though, surprises abounded in this series, and I'll start real quick. The lineup for me. The lineup for the Reds, yeah, sure, you're going to look at some of these scores and say, well, they weren't terrible, they weren't bad, but honestly, whenever it felt like the Cubs had a big inning, the Reds followed it with a very quick 1-2-3 that ultimately doomed them for the rest of the game. There were so many, and you know, I credit Cubs pitching on that, but I also look at this and I wonder where the fire is. I wonder, and there's part of this that it's going to be tough to watch the rest of this season. And it's funny, Sam, because I'm an optimistic dude, but you're catching me after a loss, which sometimes that kind of obscures the optimism.
Trust me, I know.
But when I look at this lineup, I was like, man, where is, like, Joey Votto got 3 hits last night. And nobody else. I mean, Tommy Pham had that late home run, which was pretty great to see, but it kind of felt like way too little, way too late, especially after Max Strock had given up a bunch there in the bottom of the 8th, which, I mean, I don't know what else we were expecting. Position player pitching, that's what's going to happen.
Sure.
But the lineup, I wanted to see more fight from them.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I don't know, if is it fight? It might have just been one of those nights. I thought, they sure weren't fooled by Rowan Wick. That was their best offense all series. Wick got really beat up the first game and the third game. But to me, when I talk about surprises, I'm going to take it a little bit off the field here. Did you get a chance to see Albert Almora Jr.'s comments yesterday?
I did not.
So Albert Almora Jr., who you told me off air, you've been somewhat satisfied with so far, which is fine, really called out the Cubs brass yesterday, saying that it was muddy waters, quoting during his time with the Cubs. And then I forget who the beat writer is. Somebody talked about how he's been breaking out with the Reds. So I did a little homework and realized that away from Great American Ballpark, he's OPSing 550, which isn't much. And he made a couple nice catches, but I was just really surprised. I thought Albert Almora was given a lot of chances here with the Cubs. And, he was a nice defensive player. He tagged up, made a huge tag up in the World Series, Game 7, 16. Cubs fans know what I'm talking about. But, boy, he really sounded sour about his time here. You would have think that he's sitting 330 with 15 and 40 with the way he was talking about being a Cincinnati Red. But that I was just surprised by that. Otherwise, this series, to me, not too many surprises. It was nice to see from a Cubs perspective, though, Jeff, some young outfielders, Crook, Velasquez getting a chance. It looks like Hayward's going to be on the IL. I know Cub fans are just begging to just see young outfielders with some upside to just play every day, roll them out there, see what happens, go through struggles. But from a Reds perspective, I wasn't too surprised. All I know is if Joey Votto's facing Kyle Hendricks, take a home run prop. That's a given.
I was expecting that first at bat that he had against Hendricks when he just kind of popped out the center field a little bit, lazily, not lazily on his part, but a lazy fly ball. Sure. It was like, oh man, I thought this was going to be like it was a Great American, because I remember that situation where he went homer triple his first two at bats. I'm like, here we go. But no, not quite that good. No, when you talk about this young outfield for the Cubs, Christopher Morel really has me intrigued. And it's not just because I picked him up on my fantasy team. I love the fact that I did that. And on ESPN, he randomly has eligibility at second base. I love that too. But the way that he plays is just so fun to watch. He's so energetic. That throw that he made in the second, that was, when I watched it, I'm just like, I can't do anything else. This is involuntary clapping, because that was a beautiful hit or a beautiful throw. And of course, the performance that he put on, and I know the homer that he hit came off of Max Schrock lobbing meatballs up there, because that's what he's supposed to do. They're just trying to save the bullpen from throwing somebody else out there and getting clobbered. But he did what he needed to do, and he just destroyed that ball to left field. I think the future for this dude is really promising.
For sure. And the thing that's interesting about it is, you say he's got second base eligibility in fantasy. His primary position is actually third. He could play third, short, and second, and they're just playing him at center because they have a need there. They don't really have a defensive center fielder. So I think, with Morel, his ceiling is very high. He's very toolsy, has power, has speed, like you said, has an arm. The thing that intrigues me, though, is his floor. If he does go through a funk like he had been going before this series, he has the ability to play multiple positions at an above average level, which makes him very valuable. Even if he's a 250, 260 hitter, if you're playing a lot of third, short, second, and center, that's a good big league player right there. It's very useful. So I agree. He's very intriguing and has been one of the few bright spots, along with Nico Hoerner, who had a really big series for the Cubs this year.
Yeah, I like Hoerner a lot. And I remember just watching Morel whenever they were at Great American last series before this one, and was like, this dude, he's pretty fun to watch. I never heard of him before when he was coming up, so this is going to be a lot of fun to see how he grows. But also, one other thing, too, that I want to kind of cover a bit is that the surprise play there with the shift on and the ground ball, and David Bodie just runs in and gets his left shoulder that he just got healed. Like, he just came back from that injury, and now all of a sudden he's having to deal with this again, where he just gets ran into, and he was down for a little bit. Like, what were you thinking in that play? Because I watched that and I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on?
I was thinking, obviously, first of all, concerned. But for me, something just hasn't been right with Bodie since he's come back. Defensively, offensively, he's been fine, but defensively, you watch the ball game yesterday. He had two misplays defense. I think neither of them were called errors, but they were both plays he's supposed to make. The Cubs just DFA'd Jonathan Villar, who's been statistically one of the worst defensive players in baseball in terms of defensive runs saved. And so you think Bodie's back, and he's a really good defender, but he was really struggling, just looked unsure of himself. He's been going through some problems in the minors with like dizziness and like some stuff that like he's been physically sick. So who knows, but it was concerning. from that perspective. But I did want to ask you real quick, Jeff, in terms of the Reds, we talk about Hoerner and Morel, and, I don't think either of those guys are building blocks offensively. Like I look at Hunter Greene as a building block, as a pitcher, right? I don't think the Cubs right now, obviously, assuming they trade Contreras, have many building blocks. We'll see with Suzuki when he comes back. Do you look at a guy like Jonathan India as a building block, or do you look at him in the category of like a Morel? Obviously, he's more established, one Rookie of the Year, but like a Morel or a Nico Hoerner, where it's like he's a really nice piece, but if he's the first or second best offensive player, we're probably not good enough.
That's an interesting question, because I've looked at the future thinking that Tyler Stephenson is probably going to be the dude that anchors this lineup. Right. There's some dudes that are coming up that are some big boppers. There's some dudes that are coming up that are pretty good contact hitters. I mean, there's one dude that honestly could supplant him if it were the kind of scenario where he continues this sophomore slump that he's in. Like, I know he had a 3-run home run the other night, but he's not been playing super well since coming back from that hamstring injury, which really, it was the same hamstring injury. He just had 2 different IL stints for it. But I think with all of that, we got to see how he adjusts. But there's also part of me that thinks with that Rookie of the Year award, and if he makes that adjustment, he might price himself out of the Reds, and he might turn into a better trade chip than somebody that you hold around. Because I think I'm with you. I think offensively, he's good. He's solid. I don't necessarily think he's a guy that you're going to be like, this is a perennial all-star that the Reds lineup can hang their head around. That's a good question, because he's not really somebody that I ever considered thinking about too deeply, in that, is there a point where we expect him to take that next step, or maybe we should move on from him? I wonder about that.
Right. No, I think I agree. I feel that way about Hoerner and Morel as well, because everyone always asks, like, around Chicago, like, what's the core? Because everybody's used to Schwarber and Baez and Rizzo. It was an obvious core when we were rebuilding. The Cubs right now don't have that core, and if they do, they're 3-4 years away from coming to the big league. So I always find that interesting. I think India, though, will bounce back. Hamstrings can be really tricky. So,
well, and it's interesting you mentioned core, because I want to kind of focus on where the Reds and Cubs go from here, because it's going to be a little bit before the Reds and Cubs play. In fact, the next time they play, it's going to be in Iowa, and it's going to be in a field of dreams. I think we'll see some, see James Earl Jones out there in the outfield. It'll be interesting. No, but that the future for both of these teams is interesting. Kind of like you said, the core for the Cubs is a little bit fuzzy. The core for the Reds is somewhat in the major leagues, but there's a couple of dudes coming up to the minors that we still need to see in the majors before we can really get excited. I'm going to tell you about those, plus tell you about how the rest of this season is going to go. We're talking about some trade chips on both of our teams, and I think a couple of them are rhymes with Mastillo and Contreras, I think is what they rhyme. Anyway, that's a terrible segue. Yeah, that's all coming up in just a moment. But first, I wanted to shout out our Twitter handles, because you can see them right here on the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening, you can't. You can follow Sam at Sam Olbur, Olbur, because he was able to actually spell his entire name for his Twitter handle. I tried that. They wanted me to add another F, but not spoiler alert, tease, the F actually stands for my middle name. I won't tell you what that is. We'll leave that for another day. But,
Frank.
Jeff with 3 Fs, Carr. You can follow us on Twitter. You can also follow at Locked On Cubs and at Locked On Reds. When it comes to the future for both of our teams, that's really what we're focused on. These day-to-day wins and losses are nice, but at the end of the day, we're not expecting either team to be anywhere near the playoff race. Heck, we're just going to be excited if our teams don't lose 100. I mean, that's kind of where I am, at least with the Reds, but the future is bright. The immediate future, those trades. And I know that a lot of people have issues with this, where they're talking about trading established guys for prospects, but really that's how a small market team like the Reds survive, and that's how the Cubs built up their World Series team. Now, the biggest trade chip, I think, for the Cubs, unless I'm off on this, is Contreras. But every time I hear about Wilson Contreras and rumors, I hear mixed stuff, like he's getting traded tomorrow. He's not getting traded at all. What's your feelings on that?
I would be very surprised if he was not traded.
Okay.
I think, and think about it, right? He's a free agent after the year anyway. So even if they already said they're not going to extend him mid-season. So even if they did have an idea to bring him back, it still would make sense to trade him and then try and bring him back in the offseason. Now that's unlikely. I think the only time that's really happened is I remember Chapman. They did it in 2016, actually, when they traded him to the Cubs. But I just think Wilson Contreras is going to get traded, Jeff. He's had an awesome year. I respect him so much as a player. He's a physically tough guy. He gives it his all every time out. He isn't very good defensively. He has a great arm, but if you do watch the Cubs on a daily basis, Yan Gomes is actually catching a lot more than Contreras, and the Cubs team ERA with Yan Gomes is exceptionally better than it is with Contreras. I just think he's not going to come back at free agency. He wants JT Realmuto money. The Cubs aren't going to give him that. The Cubs are going to be more active in the shortstop market, in the pitchers market, and I just believe they're going to trade him and get a haul back. I do not think they're going to get the type of haul Luis Castillo will get back, because Luis Castillo still has a year of control left, and that's a huge element to the type of trade, return that you're going to get. But I do think he's going to be traded. I don't think Ian Happ's going to be traded. I don't think Kyle Hendricks could be traded, and I will be talking about this ad nauseum during the trade deadline when that happens. But Contreras, for sure, it'll be tough for Cubs fans. They're going to be upset, but I do think he goes. I don't think he gets the type of package, though, that Mr. Castillo, who was dominant the other night, will get.
Yeah, I loved watching him pitch in that first game. That was the best he's looked, definitely this year, and maybe in a couple of years, to be honest with you. I mean, he's been solid, but that was just, he was working his pitches in and out of the zone, and it was just absolutely beautiful. I think that he is going to command a very good trade package. We're talking about the similar thing, and this it's a bummer to bring this up, because whenever the Reds made this trade, it was deemed that the Reds won this trade whenever they traded Johnny Cueto to the Kansas City Royals for 3 really highly touted pitching prospects. None of those guys are in the system anymore. One of those guys made the major leagues for like 20 minutes, and then he was out of the major leagues altogether. So it's kind of a mixed bag to compare those two things, but the Reds really have to hit on this, because we are coming into a period of trading away guys that when they last had this opportunity in like 2015 and 16, they waited too long on anybody, didn't get much for any of them. I mean, it's still just kind of grinds my gears a little bit that they got nothing for Jay Bruce and they got nothing for Brandon Phillips, because they held on to them way too long because they were fan favorites. The owners feel like fan favorites. Okay, we'll hold on to them. Maybe we'll be okay. And then it just didn't work out. So I'm hoping that they can play a little bit of Rays ball. I don't know necessarily that they'll be as successful, because, well, I'm pretty sure every team tries to be the Rays, and there's only one Rays. But the Reds can make these trades, and with the extra year of control, they can demand more. And I'm also hoping real quick, too, that they kind of land something with Brandon Drury. I don't think that something's going to be readily, like, everybody's going to be like, dude, they absolutely fleeced somebody for Brandon Drury. But I think in a couple of years, he's going to turn into that kind of player that really helps you get over the hump.
Yeah, I think Drury's probably going to be your guys' all-star, but you're preaching to the choir here. And obviously with the Cubs and Reds, the one thing that's different, and I don't want to go too long on this, but I think the Reds are in a little bit better position in terms of current MLB roster and core. But the big advantage the Cubs have is money, right? They're gonna spend, right? They're gonna get a Trey Turner or a Correa or a Bogarts. That's pretty popular. So they're gonna spend. But Jeff, let me tell you, even as a big market team, the Cubs made the same mistake after winning a World Series. Now, it's understandable. You win your first World Series in 108 years. The fans are thrilled. But Javier Baez, Kyle Schwarber, Chris Bryant, to a lesser extent, Rizzo and Contreras. But those 3 guys, and Jed Hoyer, the Cubs general manager, actually admitted this a couple weeks ago on the radio. They should have pulled the trigger after 18 and traded one of those guys, because it would have helped them not be where they are right now. And to be honest, as crazy as it sounds, they got lucky that they lost 11 in a row last year when they did, because if they were 2, 3, 4 games out, the fan base wouldn't let them sell those guys, and they'd be martyred in a rebuild right now with absolutely no farm system. So it's always a tricky situation. It happened with Phillips and Bruce, like you said, and to in a different situation because the Cubs did win with that core. It happened with Baez and Schwarber and Bryant. But I think the Cubs did the best they could do at the time, and I think the Reds have learned their lesson and are pretty straightforward in the direction they're headed, and I expect them to get a really nice return for Luis Castillo.
I've been told by somebody in the past, I'm blanking on who it was, that Kyle Schwarber was from Middletown.
Yeah, and don't forget, Ian Happ also went to college at Cincinnati.
That's right. He went to UC. Yeah, no, and he's had a nice year, even outside the Reds. I've said before, we've talked before off air about how, Ian Happ just kills the Reds, but he's actually had a good year overall this year. Yeah. I'd be interested to see, kind of like you said, you don't expect him to get traded, but I wonder if somebody tries to swipe him up with an interesting deal there. Yeah, sure. I like the pieces that are in the major leagues right now for the Reds. Kind of like you said, there's guys that are getting key development reps and appearances, innings, what have you, that is really going to help them grow. I mean, it sucks to watch Hunter Greene give up 5 home runs in a game to the Brewers, but those are the kind of things, you learn through failure. And I think that Hunter Greene is learning a lot. Graham Ashcraft's learning a lot. Nick Lodolo is going to be back soon. He'll be learning a lot. And then you're going to bring up guys like Ellie De La Cruz, who he hit a home run yesterday for Dayton. There's some other great dudes like Matt McClain that's coming up, and he could be a shortstop, second baseman. He could be a left fielder, something like that. There's a lot of guys that are ready to make an impact on this team. And if they can add the right pieces with these trades, the Reds really stand a shot. They really, really do. Now, we're asking the same guys generally when we're talking about the higher up positions in this organization. We're asking the same guys who caused this problem to now fix this problem, but at the end of the day, we just kind of got to be fans and have some blind faith with all that.
Right.
It's not going to change. They're not going to sell the team tomorrow. They're just not.
No, and the last thing I'll say is, coming from a Cubs fan, a different perspective. Like I said, I'll close with this, or I don't know how much longer we have, but I would kill for a Hunter Greene and a Graham Ashcraft and those guys. It does take time, but when it clicks, it'll click. Pitch. I'll use another example real quick. Shane McClanahan. Here's a guy that looks like the most polished left-handed pitcher, right? One of a Cy Young candidate. Last year, he did come up and he had success, but Jeff, he's 25. Like he's a full 3 years older than a Hunter Greene. Listen, give me a grocer for the Cubs that throws 100 miles an hour. Anybody. I mean, just anybody to get excited about. Keegan Thompson, Justin Steele, sure, but these guys, Jeff, these are number 4 and number 5 guys that you're hoping to get a lot out of. But Hunter Greene, Ashcraft, like I said, I haven't seen Lodolo, but I'm telling you, be patient. The ERA is going to blow up here, but it's going to click, and when it clicks, it might not turn back.
Well, I tell you what, that's a beautiful place to end today's podcast. Thank you so much, Sam, for jumping on here. Like Sam said, starting next week, Locked On Cubs, Sam Olbur, Matt Kazi, they are going to begin their tenure as the host of Locked On Cubs, and they got a lot to say because the Cubs have a lot going on. You're not going to want to miss them. You can find Locked On Cubs everywhere you find Locked On Reds. And by the way, thanks for making us your first listen. Now go make Locked On MLB Prospects your second listen. Lindsey Crosby has you covered on the stars of tomorrow, talking about guys coming up through the minor leagues, and he's covering the MLB draft from all angles. It's not far off. Lindsey will get you set. That's Locked On MLB Prospects, just like Locked On Reds and Locked On Cubs, free and available on all platforms. Hope everybody has a great 4th of July weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday.